I still remember the chill that ran down my spine when she uttered those words. Words that would forever mark a turning point in our marriage. "Not tonight or any night," Jessica said, with a tone so devoid of emotion it felt like someone had flipped a switch on our entire relationship. Her voice didn't shake, it didn't rise or fall. It was flat, absolute, like a judge passing sentence. And just like that, everything shifted. I'm a 34-year-old man, and that moment is carved into my memory with painful precision. Jessica, my wife, my partner of 6 years, stood across from me, not yelling or crying, but calmly informing me that the intimate side of our relationship was finished, as in, over, no negotiation, no lead-up, just done. It's not like things had been perfect between us lately. Sure, there'd been a noticeable drop in affection, a colder tone during conversations, a few late-night arguments over inconsequential things like laundry or who forgot to buy milk, but I chalked that up to stress, work pressure, burnout, the usual ups and downs of adult life. I never imagined she'd just call time on the most personal part of our bond, like it was some outdated subscription she didn't want to renew. Let me give you a bit of context. I work as a marketing manager at a medium-sized tech firm based in the Midwest. It's not a glamorous gig, but I've been there for 8 years and have managed to climb steadily up the ranks. The pay is solid, the hours are demanding, but the job gives me a sense of stability and progress. Jessica and I first crossed paths back in college. She was majoring in psychology and I was in the business school. We met during a group project in an elective we both randomly took, social impact marketing of all things. We clicked instantly. She was smart, driven, sarcastic in a way that made me laugh and just as hungry for a meaningful future as I was. Our relationship blossomed through study sessions, late-night diner runs, and long walks across campus. After graduation, we dated for 3 years before tying the knot in a low-key ceremony, attended by around 80 people, mostly close friends and immediate family. Jessica went into HR consulting and quickly built a respectable reputation. Her income was strong, and combined with mine, we were doing quite well financially. We settled in a quiet suburban neighborhood about 4 years ago, bought a 3-bedroom house with a little backyard and a cozy front porch. We hadn't talked seriously about kids yet, our careers were the priority. But we both figured that time would come. We traveled a couple of times a year, stayed in touch with a circle of mutual friends, and hosted dinner parties now and then. On paper, our life was solid, predictable, comfortable. But that night, that was the night it all started to unravel. I came home after a grueling 10-hour shift. I'd been dealing with a chaotic client pitch, and a higher-up who couldn't make up his mind about campaign direction. All I wanted was to sink into the couch, maybe split some Thai takeout, and unwind with my wife. When I walked in, I found her perched at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone with laser focus, her face lit up by the cold glow of the screen. Dinner was uneventful. We talked about trivial stuff, her office drama, my looming deadlines. Nothing deep, nothing special. But it wasn't tense, at least I didn't think so at the time. We moved to the living room afterward, like we usually did, and she continued scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or whatever rabbit hole she'd been diving into recently. I sat next to her, half watching some random sitcom rerun, thinking, maybe we'd cuddle later, maybe reconnect. When I leaned in to kiss her neck, something she used to love, she recoiled. Hard. "Don't," she snapped, eyes still fixed on her screen. That stung. I tried to keep my voice even. "You haven't been in the mood for weeks. Is something wrong?" She finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't sadness or even irritation. It was detachment. As if I were a coworker asking about office supplies. "I'm not in the mood tonight, or any night," she said. "That part of our relationship is over." I froze. For a moment I thought she was joking, testing me, being dramatic. But the look on her face? It was the look of someone who had rehearsed this moment, someone who had long made peace with it. "You're ending that part of our marriage?" I asked slowly, trying to make sense of it. "Yes," she said with unnerving calm. "I'm content with our life. The house, the routines, the companionship. But I no longer want any physical intimacy, with you or anyone." It felt like a slap. No, worse, like watching a familiar building collapse in slow motion. She continued, almost like she was reading from a script. "I've been reading a lot lately, about how women are socially conditioned to provide physical affection to men, whether they want to or not. I've realized I don't want to participate in that anymore. I'm not here to fulfill anyone's expectations but my own." I blinked. "You're saying this without even discussing it with me?" "I don't need your permission to have autonomy over my body," she replied, her tone taking on a sharper edge. one I recognized from the podcasts and social media pages she'd been immersed in lately. "This isn't about autonomy," I tried to reason. "This is about us, our connection, our bond. You're not just talking about your body, you're redefining the entire foundation of our marriage." Jessica sighed, as if I was missing the obvious. "Love doesn't mean I have to perform acts I no longer believe in. I'm tired of pretending." I asked her when this change had happened, when this shift occurred. Just a couple of months ago, things felt normal. We'd kissed, laughed, and even slept together. "It's been coming for a while," she shrugged. "I just didn't have the courage to say it out loud until now." That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. Not because she kicked me out. I just couldn't lie next to someone who had calmly dismantled the emotional core of our relationship and treated it like a Tuesday evening update. In the days that followed, we continued to go through the motions, sharing meals, watching shows, exchanging pleasantries, but an invisible wall had been constructed between us. I lived in that house, but I didn't feel at home. Not anymore. 3 days after her revelation, I brought up therapy. Over breakfast, while she scrolled through her feed, I gently mentioned I'd found a couples counselor with solid reviews. I said I thought we needed help navigating what we were going through. She didn't even look up. "We don't need therapy," she said, rolling her eyes like I'd suggested buying a new brand of cereal. "There's nothing wrong with me," Jessica snapped that evening, her voice sharp, laced with condescension. "And I won't be guilted into physical intimacy just because society expects it. Maybe you should consider therapy for your dependency on female approval." I sat there, stunned. I knew she had a right to her body, and I'd never dream of pressuring her into something she didn't want. That wasn't the issue, but the coldness in her voice, the finality of it, made it feel like I was listening to a stranger, wear my wife's voice like a mask. I felt like I had been dropped into someone else's life without notice. Her refusal to even have a conversation about what had changed between us turned our home into an alien space. Any attempt I made to understand or express how blindsided I felt was twisted into a lecture. Somehow, in her narrative, I'd become a representative of the oppressive male archetype she had come to despise. At night, I lie on my side of the bed we once shared in love. I had moved back into our bedroom from the couch, not because anything had changed between us, but because I refused to be emotionally exiled in my own home. Our bed had become a purely functional arrangement, as devoid of warmth as a hospital cot. I'd stare at the ceiling in silence, my thoughts spiraling, trying to pinpoint when we had stopped being a team. Had I really missed all the signs? Had I been so buried in deadlines, meetings, and quarterly goals that I didn't notice her slipping away from me? Or had she masked her discontent until she couldn't hold it in anymore? I ransacked my memories, tracing back conversations, expressions, and body language. Our intimacy had waned, yes, but it didn't seem catastrophic. We'd both been busy, I with increasing responsibilities at work, and she always on her laptop, glued to social media or deep in blog threads. A slowdown in our sex life had seemed almost expected after 6 years of marriage. We still had rituals, Friday night takeout and movie marathons, holding hands in theaters, and spontaneous road trips. We said "I love you" each night before sleep. Until about 2 months ago, when she stopped responding, and I stopped saying it altogether. Reality hit me like a slow, grinding pressure. I was now in a marriage where my presence was convenient, but my emotional and physical needs were irrelevant. I had become a glorified roommate, someone to split bills with, accompany her to couple-centered events, and serve as living proof that she could have a traditional partnership while completely disengaging from it behind closed doors. She still talked about us in front of others, still posted curated photos of our vacations, still smiled politely when friends asked how we were doing, but behind the scenes, I had been reduced to a symbol, a stand-in husband, a placeholder. One Saturday morning, determined to bridge the chasm between us, I tried again. We were both in the kitchen. She was sipping coffee, barefoot scrolling through her phone as usual. "Jessica," I said gently, "I'm really trying to understand and respect your choices, but I need clarity. Is there something I did that hurt you? Something I can fix?" She sighed dramatically, her head rolling back, as if I'd just asked her to solve a quantum physics problem. "This is exactly what I mean," she said sharply. "You think everything is about you. You think my decisions are reactions to something you did." "I'm not trying to center myself," I said carefully, though my voice cracked slightly. "I just want to understand where this leaves us. We're married. We're supposed to be partners." "That's the problem with men," she muttered. "You assume marriage gives you access. My autonomy isn't up for debate." "I'm not debating your autonomy," I said, keeping my voice even despite the growing tension in my chest. But your choices affect me too. You changed the terms of our relationship without even asking how I felt about it. And that, she said with finality, is why the patriarchy persists. Because men can't stand it when women assert control over their own lives. I walked away then, feeling more hopeless than I had in years. Any effort to engage was thrown back in my face. She had constructed a worldview so rigid that my mere attempt to talk was proof, to her, that I was part of some oppressive system. 2 weeks later, I sat in my car in the driveway after work, engine off, headlights dimming. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. What was waiting for me? A forced conversation about her latest empowering post, a passive-aggressive remark, another night in a house where love had been replaced by ideology. That's when I understood something vital. I had a choice. I could keep trudging through this emotional wasteland, praying for a miracle that would never come. Or I could redirect my life, focus my energy on something that might actually bring growth and meaning again. As I stepped through the front door, a calm resolve settled over me. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't going to scream or issue ultimatums. I was going to reclaim myself. The transformation began quietly. I started setting my alarm for 5:30 AIY, long before Jessica stirred. The early morning became my sanctuary. No judgment, no lectures, no walking on eggshells. Just me. The first thing I added was 20 minutes of meditation. I had always dismissed it as New Age nonsense. But those moments of silence helped clear the emotional fog that had clouded my brain for months. I'd sit cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, focusing on my breath, letting go of the anger, confusion, and grief. Then came physical exercise. I started small. Push-ups, crunches, light jogging around the neighborhood. I was stiff at first, sluggish from months of neglect. But day by day I felt stronger, more grounded. By the time Jessica emerged, usually around 6:45, I had already showered, brewed coffee, and started reading a book at the kitchen table. "You're up early," she observed on day 3, eyeing me with mild irritation. "Just making some adjustments," I said casually, not looking up. She mumbled something about toxic masculinity and the gym bro mindset. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The following week I signed up at a fitness center near my office. Instead of heading straight home after work to a household devoid of warmth, I hit the gym, lifting weights, pushing my limits. It became a form of therapy. With each set, I let go of another shard of resentment, another fragment of dependency. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes, hoping for a sign that she wanted to talk. I stopped seeking her approval. My thoughts began shifting from "how do I fix this" to "what kind of future do I want without this pain?" I reached out to old friends, guys I hadn't seen in years because Jessica always rolled her eyes when their names came up. She'd called them immature or sexist or worse. But reconnecting with them was like breathing fresh air. We met for coffee or a quick drink after work. I kept my home life out of those conversations for now. I wasn't ready to share the chaos. I just wanted to feel normal. For a while, those get-togethers with my friends weren't about seeking pity or tearing down my wife behind her back. They were about reconnecting with people who remembered me before everything got so complicated. For the first time in a long while, I was engaging in conversations where I wasn't walking on eggshells, where I didn't have to analyze every word for political correctness or gender dynamics. It was about rediscovering who I was beyond the label of husband, especially one whose wife now viewed him with subtle disdain. What struck me most wasn't just the ease of the conversations, it was the realization that I wasn't alone. A surprising number of the guys I knew were quietly dealing with their own versions of the same phenomenon. Different circumstances, sure, but the same underlying pattern. Long-term partners who had, somewhere along the way, morphed into critics rather than companions. Chris, a good friend of mine, 36, had been dating a woman for 3 years. When they first met, she was totally fine with his gaming hobby. He played a couple of hours in the evening to unwind. It was no secret. But suddenly, after moving in together, she started calling it immature, even toxic, despite knowing it had always been his preferred way to decompress. The new narrative was that it represented an escape from emotional labor or avoidance of household equality. Overnight, what had once been a harmless outlet became ammunition in a string of accusations. Then there was Mark, a college buddy, now 35, who confided that he couldn't post anything on social media without his wife jumping into the comments to publicly correct his phrasing or criticize his stance on topics like climate or gender roles. "It's like we're expected to be clairvoyants and scapegoats at the same time," Chris said one afternoon over lunch. "Mind readers and punching bags." That line hit me hard. You can't win, not when the rules are always shifting and you never got a say in them to begin with. That's when it clicked. Maybe I didn't have to keep playing. Maybe I could write my own rules, redefine the game on terms that didn't leave me feeling hollow. I started making small changes, ones that restored a sense of agency in a life that had begun to feel like a slow erosion of my dignity. First, I quietly opened a high-yield savings account that Jessica couldn't access. It wasn't about hiding money or undermining our financial partnership. I still contributed my fair share to all joint expenses, mortgage, groceries, utilities. But I redirected what had once gone to indulgences meant to keep her happy, like the luxury retreat in Costa Rica she'd been hinting about for our anniversary. That money went into investments for my future. Instead, I began monitoring my spending with intention, cutting out mindless purchases and redirecting that energy into a tangible financial safety net. The simple act of watching that balance grow, even slowly, felt like reclaiming a piece of my freedom. A month into my personal transformation, I noticed something unexpected in the mirror. The physical improvements from daily workouts were unmistakable. My shoulders were squarer, my core firmer, and that chronic tightness in my back and neck had started to fade. But beyond the surface, it was my expression that surprised me most. My eyes didn't look tired or defeated anymore. They looked clear, intentional, awake. With that renewed self-pride of mine came a change in how I presented myself. I refreshed my wardrobe, not out of vanity, but because I wanted my external self to match the inner clarity I was building. I swapped out old baggy shirts and worn jeans for tailored clothes that flattered my evolving physique. Nothing extravagant, just solid, well-fitting basics that made me feel sharp again. The first time I wore one of my new shirts to dinner with friends, it didn't go unnoticed. "You've definitely slimmed down," Melissa, a friend from our social circle, said as we gathered around the dinner table. "You look great." I smiled and offered a simple response, "Just been focusing on taking better care of myself." Jessica noticed too, though she did her best to hide it behind passive-aggressive remarks. "Isn't that shirt a little snug?" she said one morning watching me from the hallway as I buttoned it up. "You look like you're trying way too hard. Very midlife crisis vibes." I just smiled and left for work without a word. Her annoyance only confirmed what I already knew. Something had shifted in the dynamic between us, and not in her favor. My personal renaissance wasn't limited to fitness or finances. I also revived a passion I'd shelved years ago: photography. It was something I used to love, an artistic outlet that gave me peace. I had stopped years back, partly due to Jessica's complaints that it took time away from us. Ironic now, considering how detached she had become from that very us. I enrolled in a weekend photography workshop and bought myself a modest but high-quality DSLR camera, along with 2 lenses that covered everything from wide landscapes to intimate close-ups. Every Saturday morning I'd rise early and drive out to local trails, woods, and scenic lookouts, chasing the morning light. Those solo hikes became sacred hours where I wasn't a husband, or a victim, or a pawn. I was just a man with a camera, trying to capture beauty before it faded. My early shots were shaky, but I dove into online tutorials, watched seasoned professionals dissect their work, and practiced relentlessly. Slowly, I improved. I began capturing moments that actually made me proud. Sunbeams filtering through mist, the texture of frost on late autumn leaves, storm clouds rolling in like a wave of tension over still fields. I posted my work online, cautiously at first, but it found a small audience. Other hobbyists, a few pros, and even some strangers started commenting, sharing, and encouraging. Eventually, I started offering prints through a digital marketplace. It wasn't a huge moneymaker, but it brought in a modest trickle of income, every cent of which went into that separate account. One Saturday evening, Jessica finally said something. "Where do you keep going so early in the mornings?" she asked, her tone dipped in suspicion rather than curiosity. "Out taking photos," I answered without elaboration. She blinked. "Since when are you into photography?" "Always have been," I said, my voice even. "Just never had the time." She looked like she wanted to press further, but something in my posture stopped her. Maybe it was the realization that she no longer held the authority to control my choices. Or maybe she just didn't like that she suddenly knew less about me than she used to. "Well," she said finally, "I needed help with stuff around the house last weekend, but you weren't around." "You could have texted," I replied, sipping my coffee. "The phone works in the mountains." She huffed, her tone sharpening. "I shouldn't have to text my own husband just to get help." I shrugged. Things change. Those 2 words landed between us like a dropped vase, heavy and unmistakable, and in that silence I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not anger, not even resentment, but recognition. a realization that maybe her unilateral decisions had begun to ripple outward in ways she hadn't anticipated. At work, the benefits of my new mindset were impossible to ignore. I approached every project with renewed energy and strategic clarity. The fog that had clouded my thinking during months of emotional exhaustion had lifted. My performance improved across the board. My boss, Rob, a sharp, observant guy, called me into his office after a successful client pitch. "Whatever you're doing," he said, smiling, "keep doing it. That was the best presentation I've seen from you in a year. You're on fire lately." That simple compliment from Rob, my boss, carried more weight than I expected. After months of walking through a cold, distant home life, where affection had been replaced with indifference and connection had given way to curt exchanges, hearing genuine praise in the workplace meant something. Not everything, but enough to put a crack in the fog that had clouded my self-worth. I found myself leaning into the momentum. I started volunteering for the kinds of work assignments I used to avoid, projects that involved travel, late nights, and public speaking. In the past, I would have turned them down, choosing instead to prioritize time with Jessica. But now, that time no longer felt valuable. It wasn't quality time. It was tension, silence, and the ever-present feeling of being judged for simply existing. My first trip was a 3-day marketing conference in Chicago. Then came a week-long training session in Denver, followed by a high-stakes client presentation in Boston. Each journey felt like taking a breath after being underwater for too long. Hotel rooms became peaceful sanctuaries where I could spread out without judgment or emotional landmines. Mealtimes, usually so fraught at home, became pleasant again. No snide remarks about my food choices or sarcastic jabs about carbon footprints. The Denver trip proved especially memorable. While there, I reached out to Tom, an old friend from college who had relocated to the area years earlier. We spent a Saturday hiking the Flatirons just outside Boulder, catching up on life and swapping old stories. I brought my camera along and captured some of my most striking shots yet. Sunlight piercing through clouds, alpine lakes shimmering like mirrors, a hawk captured mid-flight. When I posted the photos online that night, my follower count jumped dramatically. Within a week, I'd sold 3 prints, more than I had in the previous 2 months combined. "You know," Tom said as we sat on a rocky overlook catching our breath, "you could probably make a serious side hustle out of this, maybe even something more." I chuckled at first, brushing it off as a kind remark from a friend. But the idea nestled into my brain like a seed in fertile soil. What if photography wasn't just an outlet or a coping mechanism? What if it could be a pathway? A door to a future that didn't involve tiptoeing around a partner who no longer seemed to like me, let alone love me? 3 months into my redirection, the evidence was everywhere. I was sleeping more soundly. My workouts had become routine, no longer a chore but a necessity. I'd dropped weight, gained strength, and reawakened the fire in my belly I hadn't felt in years. My focus at work was laser sharp. My professional performance had never been better. Except for the hollow shell of a marriage I still returned to each night, everything else in my life was climbing. The irony didn't escape me. In removing her affection and closing herself off, Jessica had inadvertently pushed me to rediscover my own value, to rebuild from the ground up. It was as if the universe had thrown me into the fire just to forge a stronger version of myself. What Jessica didn't know, because I no longer felt obligated to share every detail of my life with her, was that I'd opened a second checking account. Into it, I funneled half of every paycheck, including any bonuses or freelance photography sales. The other half still went into our joint account to cover my share of the household costs. I wasn't being sneaky, I was being strategic. I called it my escape fund, not because I planned to use it immediately, but because the option, the possibility, gave me a sense of autonomy that I hadn't felt in years. One evening, as I slung my camera bag over my shoulder, ready to head out for a nighttime shoot with the local photography group, Jessica surprised me. "Are you seeing someone else?" The accusation wasn't laced with pain or fear, it reeked of entitlement. This was from the woman who had unilaterally ended our physical intimacy, who now expected me to remain tethered to her emotionally, while she continued living as though I were invisible. "No," I said honestly, pausing at the doorway. "Why would you think that?" She crossed her arms. "You've changed, you're never home anymore." The audacity made me want to laugh, but I held it in. "I'm just focusing on what fulfills me," I said coolly, turning her own words back on her. "Isn't that what you've been doing?" "That's different," she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "Is it? You made a personal choice. I'm making mine. About how I spend my time, who I spend it with, and what goals I pursue. That's all." "So what, this is payback?" she asked, her voice rising. No, I said, locking eyes with her. This is me adapting to the new version of our relationship. You set boundaries, I'm respecting them. Now I'm setting mine. She didn't reply. I didn't wait for one. As I drove to meet the group, I realized something monumental. I no longer needed her to change. I wasn't waiting for apologies, or for her to wake up and suddenly rediscover her love for me. That part of me, the pleading, desperate part, had been replaced by a man focused on building something better. Something mine. That night, we met at a local park to practice long-exposure night photography. Among the attendees was a guy named David, who introduced himself as a content editor for a regional outdoor magazine. "These are fantastic," he said as he flipped through my recent shots on my camera's display. "We're always looking for new contributors for our nature section. Would you be interested in submitting something?" Just like that, another door creaked open. When I returned home, Jessica was already in bed, probably annoyed I hadn't stuck around to hear another rundown of her office drama, or complaints about social injustices I had no control over, but I didn't care. My mind was too alive with possibility. 6 months into my redirection, I found myself at a company retreat, a lakeside resort nestled in the woods 2 hours from the city. It was a weekend meant for strategic brainstorming, but also for reconnecting as a team. That evening, after a productive round of meetings, we gathered around a fire pit. Stars twinkled above, conversations flowed easily, laughter came naturally. Emma, a newer member of the marketing team, settled into the seat next to mine. She was 29, thoughtful, observant, and, unlike Jessica, she listened without judgment. Her presence was soft, grounded, and real. "You know," she said, her voice just low enough for me to hear over the crackle of the flames. "When I started, everyone told me how lucky I was to work with you." I blinked. "Really? Why?" "They said you turned the department around, but they also said something else. They said you used to be different, kind of distant, like you were always carrying something heavy." I looked into the fire, letting her words settle. "I was," I said after a pause. "But then I realized the only thing I could control was myself. So I started there." She nodded, a quiet smile forming. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. You seem like someone who's finally aligned with what he wants." We sat like that for a while, just talking about work, about life, about our shared love for hiking and photography. For the first time in ages, I wasn't guarded. I wasn't careful or reserved. I was simply myself. Emma was sharp and insightful, with a kind of dry, unexpected humor that disarmed me more than once during that weekend retreat. We found common ground quickly: photography, hiking, an appreciation for natural light, and a shared sense of humor about the quirks of corporate life. When I showed her some of my recent landscape shots on my phone, she leaned in closer, her curiosity unmistakable. "These are incredible," she said, swiping through the images slowly. "You've really got something here. Composition, contrast, mood. Have you thought about displaying these professionally?" I hesitated for a beat, then replied, "Actually, I've started selling a few prints online, and a local magazine's considering featuring some of my work." The words came out more confidently than I expected. Sharing this part of my life, something I'd cultivated on my own outside of Jessica's dismissive orbit, felt good. More than good, actually. It felt like breathing for the first time in months. "That's amazing," Emma said, her eyes lighting up with genuine encouragement. "I'd love to see more sometime." Her interest was sincere, and her smile wasn't laced with subtext or sarcasm. It was just a smile, warm and encouraging. It struck me then how long it had been since someone looked at me like that. Not with skepticism or disapproval, but with real admiration. As we sat, shoulder to shoulder, reviewing my shots, the subtle pressure of her arm against mine sent a strange jolt through me. Nothing dramatic, just a reminder that I hadn't been touched in months, not even in passing. The sensation of someone leaning into me without recoiling, of a presence that wasn't cold or judgmental, stirred something primal and undeniable. I gently shifted away, more out of respect for my own boundaries than anything else. Whatever Jessica and I had become, we were still technically married. And I wasn't going to be the guy who started something new before properly ending what came before. That night, as the group disbanded and made their way back to their cabins, Emma walked beside me along the winding gravel path through the trees. "A few of us are doing a sunrise hike before the morning session tomorrow," she said casually. "You should come. That golden hour light you love, perfect for your shots." I agreed without hesitation. And so the next morning, I stood at the crest of a ridge with Emma and 2 other colleagues, the sky exploding in hues of crimson, gold, and lavender. I snapped photo after photo, but my lens was repeatedly drawn to Emma, her silhouette framed against the breaking dawn, her expression peaceful and open, so different from the guarded, performative faces I had grown used to at home. Emma embodied everything I had been missing: authentic interest, genuine kindness, and mutual respect. It wasn't about attraction alone. It was the way she listened, how she asked thoughtful questions, how she made me feel seen without needing anything in return. Still, I knew I wasn't free to explore anything more, not yet. I had to resolve the unfinished business of my marriage first, no matter how lifeless it had become. When I returned home that Sunday evening, I was surprised to find Jessica in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. It was the first home-cooked meal she'd attempted in months. Her sudden domestic revival immediately raised red flags. "How was the retreat?" she asked, her tone oddly warm. "Productive," I said, setting my camera bag down by the door. "We finalized next quarter's strategy." She nodded, then added, "I saw some of the pictures you posted. Gorgeous scenery." "It was," I replied, watching her carefully. Her interest felt calculated, not curious. "Got the woman in some of the shots. Is she on your team?" Her question caught me off guard. I hadn't realized that Emma appeared in so many of the images. "That's Emma," I replied evenly. "She joined marketing a few months ago." "She's very pretty," Jessica said, her eyes narrowing slightly as they searched my face for a reaction. I kept my tone neutral. I hadn't really noticed. Jessica scoffed. "Really? You've got a dozen shots with her in them. Seems like you noticed plenty." Her accusatory tone made it clear she wasn't just curious. She was feeling threatened, maybe even jealous. The irony was staggering. "She was in the frame during our group activities," I said calmly. "Why are you asking about this?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned back to the stove, her shoulders tense. "I just think I have a right to know who my husband is spending time with." That was it, the moment everything crystallized. "You made it very clear that some aspects of our marriage were over," I said softly. "You don't get to end the physical part of our relationship and then monitor my professional interactions like nothing's changed." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. That was when I decided to accelerate my exit strategy. The hypocrisy of her expectations, her sudden attempts at control now that I had emotionally detached, it was all too much. Over the next week, Jessica became almost unrecognizable. She asked about my day, she offered to watch shows with me, she cooked dinner 2 more times, and didn't once bring up social politics. It was like she was trying to rewind the clock, to go back to a version of us that hadn't existed in years. But I knew better. It wasn't love or regret, it was control. She felt me slipping away, and she was trying to pull me back into her gravitational field. Instead, I pushed forward. 2 pivotal events aligned in my favor. First, I received a significant promotion at work, one that came with a pay raise and increased travel flexibility. I didn't tell Jessica. I simply updated my direct deposit to reflect a new routing split. More into my personal account, enough into our joint one to cover appearances. Second, I learned through professional contacts that Jessica's company was preparing for layoffs. A merger was underway and her department was rumored to be on the chopping block. It wasn't inside information, just the kind of whispers that circulate in business circles. The timing couldn't have been more fortuitous. Weeks earlier, I had even helped a colleague's spouse land a job at a firm I knew would be looking for Jessica's exact skill set. I could have made one phone call and gotten her an interview. But I didn't. She'd made her choices. Now I was making mine. I retained a lawyer, paying cash from my separate account. I learned what documents to collect, what statements to prepare, and how to protect myself in the event of divorce. I kept detailed records. Jessica's declaration that intimacy was off the table, her subsequent behavior, and anything that would support my case. I also found out that Jessica had been painting herself as a victim to her friends and family. She told them I had emotionally checked out, that I didn't understand her journey, that I resented her independence. What she didn't say, of course, was that she had unilaterally redefined our marriage and expected me to keep smiling through it. That sealed the deal. My departure needed to be clean, final, and unambiguous. There could be no lingering threads to pull me back in, no emotional appeals, no more ambiguity. Just 2 people, finally acknowledging that what they had built was no longer a home, but a shared roof under which resentment and silence had taken up permanent residence. 2 weeks after my decision, the news broke. Jessica's company officially announced the layoffs. She came home that evening looking pale and shaken. Her shoulders slumped as she dropped her purse by the door. "My department might be cut next month," she said quietly, her voice laced with a mixture of fear and expectation. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted sympathy, reassurance, the kind of unconditional emotional support I had always given without hesitation. "That's tough," I said, nodding slightly. My voice was calm, distant, and polite. "I'm sure you'll find a way to manage." She blinked, visibly surprised by my neutral tone. No hug, no words of encouragement, just professional detachment. It was the kind of response I had become so accustomed to receiving from her in recent years, now turned back in her direction. The layoffs came quicker than either of us expected. That Friday she came home from work in tears, her makeup streaked and her eyes red. "I lost my job," she sobbed, dropping onto the couch as if her knees could no longer support her. "They eliminated the entire department." I paused, set down my coffee mug, and looked at her without emotion. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "What's your plan?" She stared at me like I had just slapped her. "My plan? I just lost my job. I haven't even processed it yet." "Of course," I said, nodding again. "Take all the time you need. But just remember, our financial responsibilities continue. The bills won't pause for either of us. So let me know how you plan to contribute moving forward." Her jaw dropped. "Are you serious? I'm in crisis and you're talking about bills." I gave a small shrug. "Just being practical. You've always said we share everything 50-50. That's what equality looks like, right?" The next morning, I made my move. While she was in the shower, I logged into our joint account and transferred every cent into my personal, private bank account, leaving behind only a buffer to avoid triggering overdraft alerts. I didn't feel guilty. I felt clarity. Then I packed a bag, only the essentials: my laptop, documents, clothes, camera gear, and a few personal keepsakes, everything I would need to live my life separately. I didn't need much. When she came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, hair dripping, she found me sitting on the couch with a manila envelope in front of me. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for it. "Divorce papers," I said evenly. "I've realized I deserve more than a marriage built on unilateral decisions and broken agreements." Her expression shifted rapidly, shock, then disbelief, then anger. "You're divorcing me because I wouldn't sleep with you?" she hissed, her tone full of accusation. "No," I said. "This isn't about sex. This is about respect. You made a life-altering decision without even consulting me. You told me the emotional and physical core of our relationship was off the table. Then you expected everything else to stay the same. That's not a partnership. That's control." Her face twisted with fury. "So you're leaving me for that work chick, Emma, right? How predictable." "This has nothing to do with Emma," I said firmly. "This is about you and me, and the fact that I've been living as a stranger in my own home for nearly a year." She noticed the missing funds immediately. "You emptied our account?" she asked, horrified. "You can't do that. I just lost my job. How am I supposed to live?" "Not my problem," I said, using the exact phrase she had once thrown at me when I'd tried to discuss our failing intimacy. "You were the one who wanted complete autonomy. This is what that looks like." "This is financial abuse," she cried, her voice rising, eyes flooding with fresh tears. "I need that money for food, rent, everything." "This is a consequence," I said coldly. "And by the way, the mortgage is due next week. Your half is listed in the documents. I'll expect payment on time." She looked like she was unraveling in front of me, her composure gone. The woman who once quoted feminist blogs with smug certainty was now pleading. "I can't believe you're doing this. Please, I just need some time." "You had time," I said. "You had months. You used that time to distance yourself from me. Now you're dealing with the results." The following week was surreal. Gone was the ideological bravado, the quotes from online thought leaders. Instead, Jessica became tentative, uncertain, and oddly accommodating. She brought up the idea of counseling, suggested revisiting our intimacy. One night she even appeared in the doorway of my room, wearing something that once would have stirred me. But I felt nothing. I rejected her advances, politely, but with finality. My lawyer had advised me not to vacate the premises until the financial separation was fully in place, so we continued living under one roof. The tension was unbearable, but it was temporary, and I reminded myself daily that I was almost free. Her friends started calling, texting, telling me I was cruel, that I owed her support, that I was abandoning her in her time of need. I blocked them one by one. Her parents called next. "We should talk," her father said over the phone. "You two need to work this out, maybe some mediation." "I appreciate your concern," I replied calmly, "but your daughter made her choices months ago. This is me making mine." 2 weeks into this strange stalemate, Jessica broke down again. It was late. I was working on a photo set when she approached, her face pale, her body trembling. "I need help," she said through sobs. "Please, I can't do this alone." I looked at her, seeing not a wife, but a woman who had gambled everything on being right, and lost. "Isn't this what you wanted?" I asked. "Didn't you say you didn't need me? Was that marriage a construct? That intimacy was just a performance expected of women?" She crumpled onto the floor, her voice barely audible. "I was wrong. I didn't realize what that meant, what I was giving up." I knelt in front of her, not unkindly but with finality. "Jessica, I don't want to fix this. I've moved on emotionally. What you're feeling now isn't love. It's fear and desperation." "I'll do anything," she whispered. "Counseling, rebuilding, whatever it takes." "The problem is," I said gently, "I don't want that anymore. You showed me who you are, someone who only values partnership when it's convenient." I stood and picked up my car keys. "I'm moving out tomorrow," I said, my voice steady. "The divorce papers are ready. If you sign them, I'll offer a one-time settlement to help you transition. If you contest, I'm prepared for a long, legal battle." She didn't respond. I walked away. "You planned this all along," Jessica said quietly, her voice hollow with dawning comprehension. "From the moment I said those words, you were already working on your escape." "No," I corrected gently but firmly. "I started planning the moment I realized you no longer saw me as your partner, but as something disposable, a fixture, an accessory to your self-actualization. That's when I knew it was time to reclaim my own worth." She didn't reply. Maybe because deep down, she knew I was right. Her silence, so often used as a weapon in our later years, was now her only shield, and it no longer had any power over me. "I should thank you," I added, "because through all this, you taught me an important lesson about self-respect, about what I deserve." The next day, I moved into the apartment I had already prepared weeks before. My essentials were neatly packed, my key ready. There was no drama, no grand announcement, just a quiet departure, a soft, firm end. Jessica signed the divorce papers without contest. She accepted the one-time settlement as outlined, and within weeks I heard from mutual friends that she had left the state. Apparently, she'd moved back in with her parents, her once fierce ideals about independence and empowerment quietly shelved in favor of stability and support. As for me, I kept moving forward. I threw myself into the life I'd been rebuilding piece by piece. Growing professionally, developing my side business in photography, continuing my fitness journey, and embracing every opportunity that affirmed the new version of myself, one grounded in strength, clarity, and balance. Eventually, Emma and I began dating, slowly, respectfully. She was everything I hadn't known I needed: compassionate, intellectually curious, and genuinely present. There were no games, no power struggles, no Cold Wars disguised as boundaries. With her, I felt seen and heard, not evaluated or corrected. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, something remarkable happened. My first solo photography exhibition opened at a well-regarded local gallery. On the main wall hung one of my favorite pieces, a landscape bathed in dawn light, taken on that early morning hike during the company retreat. That was the morning everything changed. The moment I truly understood that I deserved more than what I'd settled for. And that was the real victory, not taking her money or her comfort. The true triumph was becoming the man I had neglected for too long. Not bitter, not broken, but rebuilt, confident, capable, whole. Sometimes, Jessica still reaches out, always through carefully worded emails or brief messages, usually when she's in some kind of financial bind. I respond only when necessary, in a tone that's professional and detached. No anger, no cruelty. Just finality. My emotional investment in her is long gone. Our mutual friends, who were once hesitant or confused by my abrupt actions, eventually came to understand the full story. Some even apologized, acknowledging that what I did wasn't about vengeance. It was about self-preservation. But consequences are neither cruel nor generous. They are simply the outcome of decisions. Jessica chose to dismantle the foundation of our marriage, believing she could remove one pillar and still expect the structure to remain intact. When it crumbled, she didn't suffer injustice, she met reality. This experience taught me something critical, that self-respect isn't selfish, it's foundational. And sometimes the most dignified response to someone who treats you as an afterthought is not rage, but acceptance. Not begging to be chosen, but quietly choosing yourself. So, if you're listening to this and finding echoes of your own relationship in my story, hear this clearly. You have options. You don't have to tolerate one-sided decisions. You don't have to abandon your needs or identity to prop up someone else's ideology. And you certainly don't have to ask for permission to pursue peace. Because when someone changes the rules without your input, they're telling you something vital, not just with their words, but with every cold shoulder, every closed door, every withheld kindness. They're telling you what you mean to them. So listen closely and act accordingly.